Hey guys, and welcome back to another tank review. Now I must admit, it's been a while. So back in August I did actually put a post up asking for setups. Since then we ended up getting our keys to our house, spent a month straight doing it up and then moving and settling in, and before I knew it, it was autumn, so here we are. I had so many entries for this video that I may end up making a second tank review video relatively soon based on the same entries that came in August, just because there's so many to go through. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that. And if you're not familiar with this type of video, basically I react to, review, fix your setups. All of the previous episodes can be found linked in the description down below. But without further ado, let's look at our first setup. So this setup is from Weiro, and basically they wanted EcoF, but their dad convinced them to get this substrate. Now they didn't say what it was, but to me it looks a bit like crushed or ground walnut. If so, it would be best to change this. From what I've heard, this is not a safe substrate for leopard geckos. But overall, other than the substrate, the only thing I'd say to change is maybe build up an area, like a hide / basking area under this heat lamp. You can do this with slate and rock, or you can kind of buy hides pre-made like this. This way your gecko can get heat and either bask or hide away, so it has that option. Also, you could always move the UV over a little. It's not a major problem in this size tank, but usually if you have heat, light, UV, stuff like that, it should all be on the same side as it's meant to mimic the sun. The next setup comes from Sanchez, and basically they have one gecko in quarantine, like we all are at the moment still. Are we? How are you doing around the world? Anyway, they also have one 3-month-old gecko. It's probably older now because they sent it in August. Also, why is this gecko's eyes so adorable? It like looks sad, but like in an adorable way. Anyway, so the gecko is currently in a 10 gal tank, but it will get upgraded once it gets older, and generally 10 gal tanks are only really good for babies. If you are keeping an adult in a 10 gal, please upgrade. It's such a small amount of space. The only thing I did want to double check with this is hopefully the black and white one is in quarantine just because, you know, it's new and that's great practice, and not because you're going to house them two together. Generally, cohabbing isn't a great idea. Anyway, the tank is very simple, but a decent starter home for a baby, so good job. I know you asked about things for your geckos to climb on, so once you upgrade, maybe you could add in some kind of branch, nothing too high, but something sturdy that it can climb on. Also, whilst looking through these photos, I just noticed the temperature. Ideally, we want that on the hot side to be around 90. This next setup is from Holland, not the country, a person.
Holland is a region and former province on the western coast of the Netherlands. It is not a country, you fool.
And one thing that caught my attention was something that appeared in the description of this setup, where Holland says, "I do not use a UVB because there is adequate window lighting in the room he is in." So, the light that comes in your room, perfectly fine if you're trying to distinguish day from night. So you don't have to use an LED if you're not growing a plant and you think, okay, the room's bright enough. But it doesn't replace UV. So UVB cannot pass through glass, so let alone like the window and then the tank. So if you're relying on outside light coming in and thinking, okay, my gecko's getting UV, I don't need to give it D3, don't do that because it's getting none. So the light coming into your room, making it nice and bright, that's fine for distinguishing day from night, but it will not give your gecko UV. So make sure you are still supplementing D3. Anyway, as for the gecko's tank, the only things I'd say, and it's similar to what I've said in the past, so you can probably guess, a background can always make a difference. You can add a little extra privacy in the tank. Leopard geckos like that privacy. Instead of an analog thermometer, you could have a digital one with a probe, and I think you could probably add in an extra hide in there. I know there's 3 in there technically, but you never know, there's some space over here. Let's now have a crested gecko set up. In the next video, I'll probably try to feature a few more. So I sent some wonderful crested gecko setups. For example, you can use fake plants like Nikita here and still provide lots of coverage and places to climb and hide, or you can go bioactive like Zach has here. Now, I particularly like this hide in the tank. I have one in Lyra's tank, but it's right at the bottom. It's angled downwards, so of course she's never really used it, but Zach did want to know whether he should replace this with a coconut. But to be honest, if your gecko seems to like it and use it, then keep it. I totally would. The other question Zach had was how to prevent the tank getting waterlogged. He used pebbles as a drainage but forgot to put the mesh in between the pebbles and the substrate. So some people will recommend like charcoal, activated carbon to help the smell if the tank becomes waterlogged. And though this can temporarily help, sometimes it will absorb the smell, then dump it back out again. So long term wise, I don't know how well that will do. You could, if it starts to smell, you think, oh, this is getting a bit waterlogged, you might have to cut back a bit with the watering, just try misting. Obviously, cleanup crew help, worms, isopods, springtails. He did also ask what I'd recommend, powder blue or dwarf isopods. I would say powder blue or giant orange ones because the orange ones are doing so well in my tanks. This next setup comes from Thomas, not the tank engine, the person. The subject reads, "My tank, I really want criticism." This was tempting, although I will say I'm still like, I don't like being mean about people's tanks. This is still something you've created and I want to be polite and helpful. Now, he didn't say what the substrate is called that he's using, but he did say that he thinks it's hurting his gecko's feet and whether he should change it. I would personally, if you think it's hurting your gecko, I don't really know what it is or whether it's safe. All I can recommend is Earth Mix Arid with some slate. That should do the trick. He also uses UV and wants to know what supplements I'd recommend. I would go for Earth Pro A and Calcium Pro Magnesium. That's just because that's what I use. He doesn't remember what brand of UV he has, but please remember, if you're getting UV, going into UV, make sure you know the percentage of UVB. It's really important. So not any old UV will, you know, what you'd get for a bearded dragon would be totally different to what you get for a leopard gecko. So make sure you're focusing on that, and also remembering to replace those lamps. So a decent lamp should last 12 months, but double check on the box because some brands aren't as good and they don't last as long. Now, as for critiquing this setup, other than changing the substrate, I just think it needs a bit of life, you know? A bit of colour, pop some fake plants in there, or real ones if you want to go bioactive, and maybe add a background. Just make it visually a little more interesting because it seems like you got, you know, the hides down, so that's good. This next setup comes from Nikita, and oh my god, the picture of her gecko and the duck is just the best. Now basically, she has this wonderful tank. I was just asking what to do about plants as her succulents aren't doing too well, and she thinks it could be down to the lack of growth light and drainage, which are two pretty major contributing factors as to why a plant probably won't grow. Now, the light is a quite easy fix. You get yourself an LED growth light. However, if you didn't want to, you know, dig this all up and put a drainage layer in, maybe you could try air plants because you can mount them higher up. You can mount them in places where you already have your fake plants, and they shouldn't be planted in the ground, so not an issue. You can move them about, take them out to spray them. Just make sure your tank has good airflow. Now, as I said at the start of this, I do have a lot of emails to go through, and I do read through all the emails. I've still got a lot to go through. I tend to go in chronological order. Now, a lot of the time, there really isn't much to comment on to critique. A lot of the setups come through, and they're actually just really nice setups. Like, there's nothing to talk about, negatively anyway. So, if you're not in here, in this video, don't take it as a negative. It might just be that your setup was really good. Sometimes I do get setups I'd like to comment on, but the pictures are so small you wouldn't see them in a video. It's just pixelated. But there are some setups that come through that are nice, decent enough setups, but I had the same sort of critique for them. So I don't want to keep repeating myself. So I thought I'd use Emma and Connor's setups as examples. So basically, they're nice, clean looking setups. Very simple, very nice. But Normally the only thing I would change, and I say this throughout, is add a background, add more height, add more coverage. So like Emma's setup, I believe, is 40 gallons. Nice big setup, but you can add so much more in here to make it a bit more interesting. And we have a few examples. Like Oliver's setup has this big background going on. I don't know if he made this himself, but you could make this a little more interesting. You could add some plants on it, you could add some ledges on it. Given the opportunity, you can use this vertical space because leopard geckos will climb. As you can see with Macho Bella's gecko, they will climb, you know. Another example would be Emma's setup here. She's got a background, a simple background in there, but she's also got some big plants and cork. So lots going on, lots of places to hide. Then there's Maritz, they've created this really cool stacked rock slate situation where the gecko can climb, but also there's a secret tunnel around the back. The only criticism I have for this tank is the substrate because it looks a little bit like sand, but other than that, like, it's really interesting to see all the different ways you can add stuff to the background and use that vertical space. But as you can see, there's a whole array of setups and tanks out there that you can choose from, and obviously I show my tanks, but I'm always inspired by you guys and the setups you send me, so I wanted to end on a few of those who came through just so you can sort of see what's going on. Now, as I said, I will make another one of these with the entries I received for this video in the near future, so make sure you are subscribed. Now, before I go, I'd like to give two Leopard Gecko channels a shout out. I know they are both very passionate about geckos and they've been messaging me for a while, and I promised I would do a shout out. So please check out Leopard Gecko Facts and Leopard Gecko World here on YouTube. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.